Have you ever noticed how the most spiritually awakened people you know seem to be fading into the background of life? Not dying, not leaving physically, but quietly withdrawing from the noise of the world as if they know something the rest of us have yet to discover. Type "I feel it" too in the comments if this resonates with you right now. And if this mystery intrigues you even slightly, hit that like button, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see the spiritual path forever. There's a phenomenon happening right now, in this very moment, that most people will never consciously recognize. The individuals who have touched the deeper layers of reality, who have tasted genuine spiritual awakening, are vanishing from the social fabric of ordinary life. They're not running away to caves in the Himalayas or joining remote monasteries, though some do. No, they're disappearing in a far more mysterious way. They're becoming invisible while living right beside you. They're at the grocery store, they pass you on the street, they might even be in your family, but something about their presence has shifted. They've become like ghosts moving through a world that no longer holds them the way it once did. This isn't a conspiracy theory or some apocalyptic prediction. This is an ancient pattern that repeats itself whenever humanity reaches certain thresholds of collective consciousness. And we are at one of those thresholds right now. What I'm going to share with you today isn't just information, it's a mirror. Because if you're watching this video, if something drew you here, there's a strong possibility that you're either experiencing this disappearance yourself, or you're about to. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand why the spiritually awake are quietly slipping away from conventional life, what invisible forces are pulling them into the shadows, and most importantly, what this means for you and the journey you're on. This isn't about fear, it's about recognition. It's about finally understanding why you might feel increasingly out of place in a world that once felt like home. So stay with me, because every word from this point forward is meant to find you exactly where you are. Throughout human history, there has always existed a hidden current, a stream of consciousness that flows beneath the surface of ordinary society. The ancient mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and Persia understood this phenomenon intimately. They knew that when an individual genuinely awakens to the deeper truths of existence, they naturally begin to separate from the collective dream that most of humanity inhabits. This wasn't seen as abandonment or escapism. It was recognized as an inevitable consequence of expanded awareness. In the Hermetic traditions of ancient Egypt, there was a teaching known as the Path of the Solitary. It described how those who had received the sacred initiations would gradually find themselves unable to participate in the ordinary dramas and pursuits of common life. Not because they considered themselves superior, but because their very consciousness had been recalibrated to a different frequency. The texts speak of initiates who would walk among the people, but no longer be of the people, carrying a secret fire within them that set them apart, invisibly. The Buddhist tradition has a similar recognition embedded in its deepest teachings. The concept of Pratyeka Buddha, the solitary Buddha, describes enlightened beings who awaken independently and often choose to remain in quiet solitude rather than teaching publicly. These weren't failures or incomplete awakeners. They were individuals whose realization naturally drew them away from the marketplace of ideas and into the sanctuary of silent presence. The ancient texts suggest that in certain ages, when collective consciousness becomes particularly dense or chaotic, these solitary awakened ones multiply in number, withdrawing like hermit crabs retreating into their shells when the tide of collective unconsciousness rises too high. The Christian mystical tradition speaks of the desert fathers and mothers, those early spiritual seekers who fled from the increasingly institutionalized and politicized versions of spirituality into the wild solitude of the Egyptian and Syrian deserts. But here's what most people miss. They weren't running from society because they hated it. They were being pulled by something far more powerful than rejection. They were being magnetically drawn toward a reality that the noise of collective human drama made impossible to hear. Saint Anthony the Great, one of the most famous desert fathers, said something profound. "The time is coming when people will be insane, and when they see someone who is not insane, they will attack that person, saying, 'You are insane because you are not like us.'" This pattern appears across cultures and epochs. The Taoist immortals of ancient China would describe the phenomenon of entering the mountains, which wasn't always literal. It meant withdrawing one's energy and attention from the 10,000 things, from the endless complications of social existence, and returning to the source, to the Tao itself. Lao Tzu, the legendary author of the Tao Te Ching, is said to have simply mounted a water buffalo one day and ridden westward out of civilization, never to be seen again. His disappearance became the template for countless seekers who followed. What all these traditions recognized is that spiritual awakening creates a kind of gravitational shift in a person's being. Just as a butterfly cannot return to being a caterpillar, and just as someone who has seen cannot unsee, the awakened individual finds themselves naturally drifting away from the concerns, conversations, and constructs that once defined their existence. This isn't about becoming antisocial or developing a superiority complex. It's about resonance. Your frequency has changed, and the old channels of connection no longer carry your signal clearly. The medieval alchemists encoded this wisdom in their symbolic language. They spoke of the philosophical Mercury, the awakened consciousness that becomes volatile and difficult to contain within the fixed structures of ordinary life. They understood that transformation isn't just a beautiful metaphor. It's a literal reorganization of what you are, and that reorganization makes you incompatible with many of the systems and structures you once fit into perfectly. So what exactly happens when someone spiritually awakens that causes this quiet disappearance from the world? To understand this, we need to look at consciousness itself, not as some abstract philosophical concept, but as a very real, tangible force that determines how you interact with reality. Think of consciousness like a radio receiver. Most people are tuned to a specific frequency, a channel that broadcasts the collective human experience, the news, the dramas, the competitions, the endless pursuit of more. This isn't good or bad. It simply is. It's the frequency that holds civilization together, that keeps the gears of society turning. But when spiritual awakening occurs, something fundamental shifts in that receiver. New frequencies become available. You begin to pick up signals that were always there but previously inaudible. And here's the crucial part that nobody talks about. Once you can hear these new frequencies, the old ones start to sound like noise. Not because you've become judgmental or think you're better than others, but because your instrument has literally changed. Imagine trying to enjoy a children's cartoon with the same enthusiasm you had at age 5 when you're now 35. The content hasn't changed. You have. This creates what I call the resonance gap. You find yourself in conversations that once animated you, that once felt important and engaging, and now there's this strange hollowness to them. People are discussing things with great passion and intensity, worries about status, fears about what others think, excitement about acquiring things or achieving recognition, and you can still understand these concerns intellectually, but emotionally, energetically, they feel like echoes from a distant shore. You're still standing in the same room, but you're no longer in the same world. The spiritually awake begin to disappear because participation in ordinary social reality requires a certain level of unconsciousness. This sounds harsh, but stay with me. Society functions through shared agreements about what matters, what's real, what's worth pursuing, what's worth fearing. These agreements are held in place by collective belief, by millions of people investing their attention and energy into the same narratives. When you wake up, many of these narratives become transparent. You can see through them. You recognize them as constructs, as stories we're telling ourselves. And while you don't condemn them, you also can't fully pretend they're ultimate truth anymore. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're at a gathering, and everyone is deeply invested in discussing someone's social media follower count, or the latest political scandal, or comparing vacation destinations to determine whose life appears more enviable. 5 years ago, before your awakening process began, you would have been right there with them, contributing, caring, feeling the emotional charge of these topics. But now you feel like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. You can participate superficially, you can smile and nod, but the part of you that would have genuinely resonated with this has gone quiet. It's not that you judge these people. It's that you're no longer vibrating at the frequency where these things feel significant. This is why the awakened disappear quietly rather than dramatically. They don't usually make grand announcements or burn bridges. They simply begin to decline invitations. They stop initiating conversations about topics that no longer interest them. They become less available, not out of arrogance, but out of self-preservation. Because here's what most people don't realize. Maintaining presence in unconscious spaces actually drains the awakened person. It's not neutral. It costs them energy to continuously downshift their frequency to match the room they're in. Think of it like this. If you've ever held a conversation with someone who's very drunk while you're completely sober, you know that strange exhaustion that comes from it. You're constantly compensating, translating, meeting them where they are while managing the part of you that exists in a different state. This is what social interaction begins to feel like for the spiritually awake. Not because others are drunk in some literal sense, but because there's a fundamental difference in the operating system now. The disappearance also happens because awakening brings with it a kind of transparency that makes small talk and social posturing nearly impossible. When you've touched deeper truths about existence, when you've experienced even glimpses of your true nature beyond the ego, wearing the mask of social personality becomes exhausting. You can't maintain the pretense with the same ease. And society, for all its talk of authenticity, actually runs on a certain level of pretense, of agreed-upon performances that keep interactions smooth and predictable. Now we need to go deeper into something that makes many people uncomfortable, but it's essential to understand. The spiritually awake aren't just withdrawing from social obligations and shallow conversations. They're actually being pulled into a different dimension of existence that occupies the same physical space, but operates according to entirely different laws. This is where it gets mystical, but also where the truth lives. There's an ancient concept found in multiple spiritual traditions called the two worlds. Not heaven and earth, not physical and spiritual in some separated sense, but two layers of reality that coexist simultaneously. One is the world of form, of doing, of cause and effect as we commonly understand it. The other is the world of essence, of being, of causeless presence. Most of humanity lives entirely in the first world, completely unaware the second even exists. But when awakening happens, you begin to have one foot in each world, and eventually your center of gravity shifts from the first to the second. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're sitting in a meeting at work, and everyone is intensely focused on quarterly projections, on strategies to outperform competitors, on the drama of office politics. And you can function in this space, you can contribute intelligently, but simultaneously, you're aware of something else entirely. You're aware of the profound stillness beneath all the activity. You're aware of the futility, not in a depressing way, but in a liberating way, of so much of the striving. You're aware of the preciousness and brevity of life itself, and how strange it is that we're spending it this way. This dual awareness creates an unbridgeable gap between you and those who are fully immersed in the first world only. The disappearance of the spiritually awake is also driven by what I call the burden of seeing. Once you recognize certain truths about reality, about the nature of suffering, about how much of human activity is driven by unconscious fear and desire, you carry a weight that others don't. You see people hurting themselves and each other, not out of malice, but out of sleep. You see the mechanisms of ego playing out in every interaction, the subtle ways people seek validation, avoid pain, construct identities that imprison them. And you can't unsee this. You can't go back to participating in it unconsciously. But here's the paradox that the ancient teachings emphasize. This seeing doesn't make you better than anyone else. In fact, true awakening includes the recognition that there is no better than. It includes a profound compassion that comes from understanding that everyone is exactly where they need to be in their evolution. Yet this compassion doesn't necessarily translate into continued engagement with unconscious spaces. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is step back, create space, and hold a different frequency without trying to convince anyone of anything. There's another layer to this disappearance that involves energy dynamics that modern psychology barely touches. Every human being has what various traditions call an energy body, an aura, a field of consciousness that extends beyond the physical form. When you're spiritually awakening, this energy body is undergoing massive restructuring. Old patterns are dissolving, new capacities are emerging, and during this process, you become extraordinarily sensitive to the energy of environments and people. Crowded places become overwhelming. Negative emotions from others impact you more intensely. Unconscious spaces feel like you're wading through molasses. The awakened person isn't disappearing because they want to escape humanity. They're withdrawing to protect the delicate process of transformation happening within them. It's like a butterfly in a chrysalis. If you disturb it too much during metamorphosis, the butterfly emerges damaged or doesn't emerge at all. The spiritual path has similar vulnerable phases where solitude and silence aren't luxuries, but necessities. I need to address something crucial here. Not everyone who isolates is spiritually awakening, and not all spiritual awakening requires isolation. There's a difference between healthy withdrawal as part of a transformation process and avoidance driven by fear, trauma, or ego. The distinction lies in the quality of consciousness. True awakening-driven withdrawal comes with an inner peace, a sense of rightness, even if it's uncomfortable. It's not running from something, but being pulled toward something. Fear-based isolation feels contracting, paranoid, superior. Awakening-based solitude feels expansive, compassionate, and humble. The spiritually awake also disappear because the world, in its current state, often doesn't have containers for what they're experiencing. Try explaining to someone that you can't come to the party because you're in the middle of an ego death, or that small talk feels like sandpaper on your soul, or that you're being called to sit in silence and integrate revelations about the nature of reality. There's no socially acceptable vocabulary for this. So instead of explaining, which often leads to misunderstanding or concern from others, the awakened simply fade into the background, offering excuses that make sense in conventional terms, while the real reasons remain hidden. So if you recognize yourself in what I've been describing, if you feel this pull toward disappearance, toward withdrawal from the ordinary flow of life, what do you actually do with this? How do you navigate this transition without losing yourself completely, without abandoning necessary responsibilities, and without falling into spiritual bypassing or isolation that's driven by fear rather than genuine transformation? Let me give you practical guidance that bridges the mystical with the livable. First, you need to understand that this disappearance doesn't have to be absolute or permanent. It's not an all-or-nothing proposition. What's being asked of you isn't necessarily to become a hermit or abandon your relationships and responsibilities. What's being asked is that you honor the pull toward deeper presence, toward silence, toward solitude, while also maintaining whatever connections and engagements still carry genuine resonance for you. This requires discernment, which is different from judgment. Discernment is about recognizing what serves your evolution and what drains it, without making the things that drain you wrong or bad. Here's a practical technique I call energy auditing. For 1 week, keep a simple journal where after every significant interaction or activity, you note how you feel energetically. Not what you think about it intellectually, but how your body and energy feel. Do you feel expanded or contracted, energized or depleted, clear or foggy? Be brutally honest. You'll quickly discover that certain people, places, and activities consistently drain you while others nourish you. This information is gold. It's your inner guidance system showing you where the disappearance needs to happen and where genuine connection can still thrive. Once you have this information, you begin the practice of conscious withdrawal. This doesn't mean ghosting people or burning bridges. It means gradually, gracefully, and honestly reducing your engagement with the draining elements while protecting and nurturing the nourishing ones. If certain social obligations feel like energetic quicksand, start declining them. You don't need elaborate excuses. A simple, "I'm not available," or "I'm in a period where I need more solitude," is sufficient. The people who truly matter will understand or at least respect your boundary. Those who don't were probably part of what you need to withdraw from anyway. Here's a crucial practice for maintaining your sanity during this transition. Create what I call sanctuary time. These are non-negotiable periods in your schedule, daily if possible, where you completely withdraw from all external demands and simply be with yourself in silence. This isn't meditation in the formal sense, though it can include that. It's simply time where you're not performing for anyone, not producing anything, not responding to anyone. You're just present with what is. Start with 20 minutes a day if that's all you can manage, but protect this time fiercely. This is where you rebuild your energy, where you integrate the transformations happening within you, where you remember who you actually are beneath all the roles and identities. Now, let's talk about relationships, because this is where the disappearance becomes most complicated and painful. You'll find that some relationships naturally fall away with minimal friction. These were connections based primarily on shared unconsciousness, on mutual participation in dramas or distractions that no longer interest you. Let these go with gratitude for what they were. But other relationships, particularly with family or long-term friends, present a different challenge. These people genuinely care about you, and your withdrawal can feel to them like rejection or abandonment. Here's the practice. Radical honesty combined with compassionate boundaries. Have conversations where you share, as much as you're able, what you're experiencing. You don't need to use spiritual jargon or convince them of anything. You can simply say something like, "I'm going through a significant transformation in how I relate to life, and I need more solitude than I used to." This isn't about you or our relationship. It's about honoring something happening within me. Some will understand. Some won't. Your job isn't to make them understand. Your job is to be honest and hold your boundary lovingly but firmly. For those relationships that still carry genuine depth and mutual recognition, you can actually deepen them during this period. Quality over quantity becomes your operating principle. Instead of frequent surface-level interactions, you might have less frequent but far more meaningful connections. When you do engage, you bring your full presence rather than the distracted, drained version of yourself that results from overextension. Let me give you a practice for when you must engage in unconscious spaces, whether for work, family obligations, or practical necessities. I call it witnessing consciousness. Before you enter the situation, take a few deep breaths and consciously anchor yourself in the observer position. You're not trying to change anyone or fix anything. You're simply present, watching the dance of human consciousness with compassionate detachment. You participate as needed, but you don't lose yourself in the drama. You maintain an inner silence even while speaking. This takes practice, but it allows you to move through the world without being drained by it. Finally, find or create a community of others who are walking this path. This seems contradictory given everything I've said about withdrawal, but it's essential. The disappearance is from unconscious humanity, not from all human connection. There are others out there who understand what you're experiencing, who speak your language now, who can offer reflection and support. These might be found in conscious spiritual communities, online groups, or even just one or two individuals who truly see you. These connections become lifelines, reminding you that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and what you're experiencing is a recognized phase of human evolution. So here we are, at the end of this journey through one of the most mysterious and misunderstood phenomena of spiritual awakening. If you've stayed with me until this moment, if these words have resonated in that deep place within you that knows truth when it hears it, then you already understand that what I've described isn't theory or philosophy. It's a living reality that's unfolding in your own experience right now, whether you've fully acknowledged it or not. The spiritually awake are quietly disappearing from the world, not because the world is bad or because they've become too good for it, but because consciousness itself is reorganizing, both individually and collectively. We're in a time of profound transition, where the old structures of human interaction and society are becoming transparent to those whose awareness has expanded beyond them. This disappearance isn't a problem to be solved. It's a natural evolutionary response to a reality that's revealing itself in ways it hasn't for millennia. What I want you to understand as you move forward from this moment is that if you feel this pull, if you recognize yourself in what I've described, you're not broken. You're not antisocial. You're not failing at life. You're responding to a call that's ancient and sacred, a call that has echoed through every genuine spiritual tradition since the beginning of human consciousness. The hermits, the mystics, the sages, the awakened ones throughout history, they all heard this same call. They all felt the same pull toward the invisible, toward the essential, toward a reality that exists beneath the surface of ordinary life. But remember this: your disappearance, your withdrawal, your need for solitude and silence, these are not the end point. They're a phase, a necessary passage through which the chrysalis of your old self dissolves so that something new can emerge. What that something is, you cannot know in advance. You can only trust the process, honor the pull, and walk the path that's revealing itself beneath your feet, even when you can't see more than one step ahead. The world needs what you're becoming. Not the old you who could participate unconsciously in all the dramas and distractions, but the new you that's being forged in this crucible of solitude and silence. The you that carries a different frequency, that holds a deeper knowing, that can eventually return to the world, if that's what's called for, not as someone who's escaping it, but as someone who's transcended it while remaining in it. This is the true gift of the spiritually awake, not their absence, but their transformed presence when and where it's genuinely needed. So if you're in this disappearing phase right now, trust it, honor it, protect it. Give yourself the space and time you need without guilt or justification. And know that on the other side of this withdrawal, there's a version of you waiting that you cannot yet imagine, a version that's more authentically you than anything you've been before. The caterpillar doesn't know it's becoming a butterfly. It only knows it must surrender to the darkness of the chrysalis. You are in that darkness now, and the darkness is not your enemy, it's your womb. Thank you for being here, for listening, for having the courage to recognize yourself in these truths. If this video has touched something deep within you, share it with someone else who might be walking this lonely path. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give another soul is the recognition that they're not alone in their aloneness. And as always, continue to seek, continue to question, and continue to trust that invisible thread of knowing that's guiding you home to yourself. The journey continues, always deeper, always more true. Until next time, walk gently with the mystery that you are.